May morning, and good to have some sunshine. So our first order of business this morning in delegations 2.1, we have a proclamation of May as Hospice Palliative Care Month. And so it's my pleasure to be able to read the proclamation. And whereas Hospice Palliative Care Month is focused on raising awareness and recognizing that everyone should have access to quality end-of-life care. And whereas the City of Dawson Creek Hospice and Palliative Care Society is comprised of a large number of volunteers that provide direct and indirect hospice palliative care services to those individuals living within Dawson Creek. And whereas member organizations collectively reflect the entire hospice palliative care continuum, from patients who are dying but living within their communities to those who are dying in hospitals. And whereas the Dawson Creek Palliative Care Society seek to ensure that the hospice palliative care for patients and their families is integrated and of high quality, and believes that this can be achieved through commitment, awareness, and partnership. Now therefore I do hereby proclaim May 2020 as Hospice Palliative Care Month in Dawson Creek. And as our new requirements of not having the delegations here, we will ensure that we get the proclamation off to the volunteers at the Hospice Care Society and thank them for all the work they do because it is such important work for our residents and community. So thank you. Our next item on the agenda this morning is item 3, new councillor business. First one, Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I wanted to make note, usually last year anyway, I went to an event and had the pleasure to give a brief statement to all the volunteer groups. As we know, we're not doing that at the moment. Hopefully in the not too distant future we can return to it. In the meantime, I did want to make note that the City of Dawson Creek would like to thank the many volunteer groups and businesses who will be taking part in the 2020 Community Cleanup Campaign taking place this year from May 11th to the 24th. The City is incredibly appreciative of the guidance and approval from Northern Health and Northeast Environmental Health Team Lead for their assistance in the new safety protocols to make sure we are in compliance with COVID-19 safety parameters with this cleanup. So from May 11th to 24th, please watch out for the various groups, community organizations, nonprofits wearing safety vests in our local parks, ditches, and neighborhoods. We thank all of the sponsors who are continuing to support this initiative with supplies and grants, even in what has been a very challenging time for them, and they're doing it to ensure the safety of all participants. It takes a whole community to clean up our city, and we're very, very proud of the community spirit. One more note I would like to add, Your Worship, with respect to, as we saw on Facebook, you posted, the Dawson Creek Dog Park Society was kind enough to go out and initially they wanted to clean a park which wasn't, for whatever reason, neglected. We didn't include it in the community cleanup this year, but they went ahead and did it anyway, not expecting any kind of remuneration out of the kindness of their hearts because they thought it was an area that needed some a bit of love. And in light of that, we would like to, and I've confirmed with our CAO, that we're able to include them retroactively in the $200 remuneration, which is being put back into the Dog Park Society. So I think great work on them to go out and do this with no expectation of recompense. And really appreciative, and appreciative of yourself for helping them out as well, Your Worship.
Great, thank you. Thank you for taking this on. As you say, it's a really important initiative that goes on in the community every spring. It really does make a difference in the volunteers. It's amazing how much difference a group of volunteers can make in a couple of hours. And I know yesterday when we did along the creek and behind the mall, it was amazing how much garbage you can clean up and litter you can clean up in 2 hours. So thank you for that, and I know the Dog Park Society will be appreciative. Thank you, Councillor Earl. Other councillor business?
I do, Your Worship.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Wilbur.
Thank you. So first off, I'd like to say belated Happy Mother's Day to all of our mothers within our community area. And Love Dawson Creek partners with the Chamber of Commerce, and 10 mothers were given $100 to spend locally within our community, and that funding was made possible by the PRRD. So great partnership and some money for our economy. And the other thing is through NDIP, Love Northern BC has a gift card program, so you can actually go on to supportlocalbc.com, buy a gift card for a local business here in Dawson Creek or Pooskoopi or Rolla, Tom's Lake, and then you will be mailed your gift card, and that again puts some money into our economy. So I just want to thank NDIP for that program. And all of those people that are out there supporting the economy. I know there's women that have a nice little group on Facebook where they're being a fairy and anonymously dropping off gifts at other homes. And so there are a bunch of women running around putting money into our economy. So thank you for the people who started it, and thank you for those women who are participating.
Thank you, Councillor Wilbur. Thank you. Anything further from council? Thank you. So we'll move to item 4 is minutes. Minutes of our special meeting of council of April 24th for adoption. Councillor Parslow, Councillor Javetkov, all in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. 4.2, we have the minutes of our regular meeting of council for April 27th for adoption. Councillor Parslow, Councillor Javetkov, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And 4.3, we have the minutes of our special meeting of council May 4th for adoption. Councillor Earl, Councillor Javetkov, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Any business arising from the minutes of any of the minutes?
Your Worship, I have one, it's Councillor Wilbur, I have one from the April 27th minutes under Mayor's Business 9.3, and it was the grad slideshow. And through you to staff, I'm just wondering if where we're at with that, and if there was any contact made with using the big screen at the County Event Center.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Through you, Your Worship. Yes, we have been in contact with South Peace Senior Secondary as well as Encana. Shortly after our meeting, Encana contacted me immediately to say they were very receptive to working with the grad class. The grad class, as I understand it, as of Friday, is developing that presentation that will go on that big screen at the Encana Center. We also, with our sign out front of City Hall, we've looked at that. We may be limited to get that. I believe there's 180 grads. We're not sure that it will host all of the names, but we are checking on that as well.
Good. Thank you. Anything further, Councillor Wilbur?
Yes, I just want to make sure that we also touch base with Mountain Christian School. They also have a grad class.
Through Your Worship, we have done that as well to ensure that we don't miss. I believe they have 18 grads this year as well, and ensuring that everybody, both South Peace and Mount Christian, will be recognized.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other business arising for anyone? Thank you. So item 6, we have correspondence. 6.1, we have an email from Jude Cornelson. Email from UBC. Councillor Earl.
Proceed for discussion. Question.
Thank you. Second. Councillor Parslow. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Go ahead.
They note in the letter, thank you, Worship, and just they note in the letter they've got a survey they're going to administer with respect to rural communities' responses to COVID-19. I didn't see a link to the survey in this letter, and maybe I missed something, but are we expecting we're going to receive that, or as participants in that thing, they're going to email it out to us? How's that?
I certainly have responded in the past to the work that the research groups have done in regards to the rural health search and the rural medical research, but I haven't seen this specific survey, and they've said they've developed a small survey, but I didn't see a link to it either.
Okay, I just worried I'd missed something, but it
Yep.
doesn't seem like. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on that item? Thank you. Item 6.2, we have a letter from Dennis Shaver, Stick and Stone Cannabis. Blair, I wonder if we can get you to speak to this request. Are they looking for a letter of support for us, or are they looking for us to endorse the practice in the community?
It appears to me the letter is not from here. It's not
Yeah.
from one of the local businesses. It looks as though they are seeking the same ability to, as the BC cannabis stores, the government, to be able to take them out and mail out your order and so on. So this one is one of the many letters we receive from across the province, other jurisdictions that will write seeking mass approval from all of the councils around the province. So they are seeking that as form of support of some form when you read the letter. They would like to be on the same footing as the provincial, as I understand it, on the legalities.
Thank you. Councillor Javetkov?
Yeah, there were a couple letters attached to this that we just received this morning.
Yeah.
In the emails, and yeah, it's an association that's looking for a blanket authority from the province to for online sales and direct delivery. I think it's a good idea. I mean, that's typically how businesses are operating these days, and I don't see any difference with, even if it's a liquor store or a marijuana store or whatever.
Sure.
So I'd make a motion that we support it.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Earl?
Yeah, I'll second it and speak to it.
Okay, go ahead.
So I tend to agree with Councillor Javetkov. I think, one thing that was very puzzling to me is, as this was, and I understand this lobby group or advocacy group is looking to using the kind of COVID-19 to rationalize making this move. Having said that, I did find it curious when the government rolled this out in the province that they would maintain a monopoly over online sales and require local vendors, which we've got 3 or 4 here in Dawson Creek and Pooskoopi. Not only are they competing against them, but they're competing against an online order. So I'm not, even in normal times, if you're going to provide the service, I do think there should be an even playing field between private enterprise and the government, who's already the wholesaler, so has a competitive advantage there. I don't know that we need to, under with COVID, use that as a rationale for it. I think it makes sense in and of itself if you're going to do it. Level playing field for everybody.
Sure. Thank you. Blair, any issue with, so it kind of struck me when I read this, was about business licenses. So anybody who's doing business in the city of Dawson Creek through online, they wouldn't require a business license because they're not situated in our community. And that would exist for anybody. I'm assuming these online sales for cannabis as one opportunity, one aspect of that.
That's my understanding, Your Worship, yes.
Yeah. So there's a little inequity there to me when you've got businesses who are competing in your community, paying taxes and own infrastructure, and somebody who can provide that same level of service in your community without having a business license to conduct business in your community, right? And that's Amazon, that's any of them who do online ordering and competing directly with your local business. And it's an interesting thought when you think about that, and it just hit me when I was, 2 things I wondered about. Do they have a business license, and is it legal to do? So anyway, it was just a thought. So we have a motion that we're going to send a letter of support, moved by Councillor Javetkov, second by Councillor Earl. Any further discussion? Councillor Earl?
Thank you, Worship. With respect to your point, I wouldn't be opposed to having whatever letter of support we provide emphasize that this needs, our preference is that this delivery service, as they've termed it, be locally provided. I mean, I get if you order from the government store, they're mailing it to you, but I don't know that that's necessarily what they're trying to capture in this. Maybe it is, but my rationale in supporting this is that it gives our local vendors who aren't paying property taxes, who are paying a business license fee, the ability to compete with the provincial government on a more even footing. Not that we're gonna open the door up so that they'll be competing with Amazon or whatever the analogous organization is for pot selling through Amazon.
Councillor Parslow?
And it could be to the detriment of our local businesses.
Yeah.
But that's the way the economy is going.
Yeah.
Many of our local businesses who have engaged in based e-commerce are doing well, they tell me. Those that have not are suffering more than perhaps they would have done if they had not engaged, if they had taken part in e-commerce. And this could come back to bite the local people in, especially if Amazon starts getting involved. I mean, look at the fantastic delivery service and prices that they can give you sometimes.
Councillor Earl?
So I might be out of line on this. Brenda's not going to stop me though. So,
You think this
So
corporate
might it
office is
be-
going to be more friendly?
I don't know that there's a sense of urgency on providing this letter. Might it be prudent of us to take a beat on this, table it, whatever you want to say, and speak with the local vendors to gain their impression on it? Because all we've got at this point is support from a lobby group and somebody from outside the city. I mean, I have to be honest, with all the stuff on this agenda around flood mitigation, I didn't do a tremendous amount of follow-up with respect to our local vendors, and that might be something we're doing.
Blair?
Through your worship, we can definitely do that, reach out to the local vendors involved in this business. This is from an individual store, this letter that comes. And so it is interesting. I'm not sure if they've reached out to local vendors to gain support. It appears to me this looks like an initiative that they've began, but we're more than happy to reach out to the local suppliers at their stores and see if they're supportive of this and bring it back to council, if that's your wish.
Thank you. Councillor Javakov?
Yeah, I think we're overthinking it. To me, it's a simple, this is the economy. I mean, this is how everybody's operating now. So whether an individual business here in town wants to do it or not, that's really irrelevant. I mean, it's a provincial thing, and it's not just this business. If you read the attachments, it's an association that they have that's looking for the support. To me, it's simple. Let's just support it, and you know, it's critical now, especially with the COVID-19. You know, whether it expands, I think putting it in the letter that, you know, we should expand it to after COVID-19. It's just the way that business is done these days. So, you know, if you don't keep up with the technology, you get left in the dust. So I think it's good to support it and not complicate it, and, you know, create more work than is really required.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor. Are you ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. We have 6.3. We have a letter from Mr. Sean Kim from the Travelers Inn. Councillor
Receive for information.
Receive for information. Second. Councillor Javekot. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Item 6.4, we have an email from Susan Surial, the Clerk Assistant on Committees and Interparliamentary Relations in regards to a provincial budget consultation participation. Sorry, I was just going to say, we see these things a lot, and if it was Council's wish to either participate or not as a group, I'd be happy to take this on, and I think it's helpful. I think it's worthwhile for us to give input into these things, but I'll leave that to Council. Councillor Parslow?
Well, I was trying to originally move for information, but after what you've said, I think there is a good, at this time especially, with the precarious nature of municipal finances, that we have a voice in that.
I'd be happy to participate. I'd happy to, if you guys want to give me some input, if you want to have a look at it, I'd be happy to send it in, and I'll feed that back to Council, whatever your wishes are, but I think it's worthwhile to do. Councillor Javekot?
We participate in this pretty well every year, don't we? In the budget discussions?
Well,
I mean,
so they have the Finance Committee travels around when they do their stuff, but this is a survey more than that, I think. Blair?
Your Worship, I think this is taking the place of the pre-budget consultation process that has previously been held throughout the province. They can actually now do it by a survey, so.
I'll make a motion that we participate.
Okay, thank you. Second? Councillor Earl? Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Reports, 7.1, we have report number 20051 from the General Manager of Community Services regarding sensory friendly facilities. This was brought forward as a result of Councillor Kemp a month or two ago. Councillor Parslow.
I move that report number 20-051 from the General Manager of Community Services re sensory-friendly facilities be received for discussion.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Earl. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried? Go ahead. Councillor Kemp, did you want to speak to this?
No, I'm good for now.
Okay. Councillor Earl, then Councillor Javetkov.
So, and I know this question may be preliminary, Your Worship, through to staff. The two things I noted that would be something we could execute on in fairly short order, not barring, structural changes to the facility were, well, one thing, free caregiver passes. So getting some information around that with respect to the frequency cost. I don't imagine it would be, ruinous, especially given the circumstances with what our budgets around our recreational facilities and fees are going to look like. But that would help me in figuring out how to proceed. And obviously with free caregiver passes, you can't limit that to people on the autism spectrum. If you're going to do it for caregivers, you're doing it for anyone. I'm not sure if we already do that, but I would like a bit more information on that. And then I was very surprised, and pleasantly so, to find out in the report that we do have a staff member who's capable of providing training around awareness and sensitivity to the sensory issues. So if we have the capacity to provide that training to the relevant staff in-house, I don't see why we wouldn't capitalize on it. And those are two fairly, I'm not going to say easy because I'm not the one that has to do it, but they seem like there's something we could do in very short order that wouldn't involve a significant capital spend right out of the gate.
Thank you. Councillor Javetkov.
So just reading through the report, it's the tone of it is that there's a lot of things that could be done possibly, but there wasn't anything specific. I think option 2, where it says council could direct staff to conduct further research prior to initiating any sensory-friendly programming at city facilities. If that was expanded to doing more research and making some specific recommendations on, whatever times or whatever, I think that would be appropriate. Just from the tone of the report, there's nothing, there's a lot of things that could be done, but there's nothing that they have a sort of a handle on yet.
Councillor Parslow.
Yeah, when I looked at this, I was thinking that there's a focus here on the swimming pool, but we also know there are people who have real problems with bright lights. This sort of lighting, also noise, loud noises, and we're aware of some individuals who have those problems. So it doesn't seem to be all in. This report seems to be focused on maybe the autism spectrum, but I think there's other conditions as well that we've been made aware of since I've been on council, and I was aware of it as a former educator. These lights, for instance, they may be okay, but I know we had to take them out for some kids at school. So I think we need how far do we go with this always, or if we are dealing with a specific location that has been in there, let's move forward on it. But it's far more, I think, involved than just the swimming pool issue.
Yeah, the one question for me is how big is the demand, how big is the need for the service, and what kind of service can you provide with the capacity, and how much cost is that? So I don't want to take away from the overall demographics of the population, so you don't want to, if you have, using the pool as an example, if you've got 5 or 10 people that you have provided service for, now that you restrict services for 100 people or 150 people. So I would like to know how long the piece of string is, and I know that's difficult to know because until you implement the program you have no idea what kind of uptake it would be. But I would like to see that kind of some core a model put together where we say we're going to try to put together a program at the pool to begin with as a pilot to see what the demand may be and what the use may be, and how much cost has that got to create for us, and staff training and all of those things that we would need to do to be able to develop the programs. Blair, you had a comment?
Just following through, your worship, I know Ross put some time and effort into this report, looking at it based on the motion that was asked of administration from Councillor Kemp. It is really unlimited what can be accomplished here, but do know that it comes with a cost.
Yeah.
I mean, we're happy to provide you with whatever council would like, but if you were, for example, to go with, I'll give you an example, the pool, for example. If it was to be open during a set time for people that had sensory issues, then as you said, the others are not going in. So there's that cost. It is not a full cost recovery model we run with our recreation facilities. They are subsidized from the city.
And that would eat into your fees and revenue, fees and charges revenue that you would normally anticipate, I'm assuming. And then the additional costs of training and all of that stuff that would be required. So,
but we can bring back whatever council's wish is. But Ross, did you have anything to add to?
Good morning, thank you, your worship, members of council. It's somewhat small, the conversation. Municipalities across the country are trying to become more inclusive. This is something that's on the radar, although most of my discussion would suggest that communities are now just starting to think about the implications of starting these types of programs. We have reached out to local providers or support systems in the community, and we're going to have those types of meetings going forward. I think in terms of impact to our regular programming, we could at some point, and definitely we can bring something back to council, but I believe that we can introduce a soft pilot, if you will, pick an evening maybe on a weeknight where we have an adult swim or an otherwise fairly quiet session whereby anybody could still attend, but maybe we turn down the lights during that session, or maybe we don't have the children's spray toys going through that session. And it could be something as simple as providing a room or an escape area, if you want to call that, where somebody who gets anxious in that environment can step out, maybe it's off the main foyer in the building, using one of the exterior not exterior doors, but into that common area. So I think there's some opportunities to try this, to do a bit of a pilot, and happy to bring something back. I would suggest we meet with the local agencies first, get some feedback from those folks, and we can go from there.
yeah, Councillor Earl?
And thank you, worship, through your staff. Would that with your what you just described be encapsulated under, say, alternative 2 as you provided it? Would that give you enough direction, or would you need something more specific as far as the motion goes?
No, I think alternative 2 is a logical next step, and we had already we weren't able to meet with these groups given everything that's going on right now before this report, but that'll take place probably in the coming weeks, so we can bring something back.
Good. Councillor Earl?
So I will move alternative 2 in the report. The council directs staff to continue further research prior to initiating any sensory-friendly programming in city facilities.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Javetkov. Further discussion? Councillor Parslow?
In that research, maybe this, I beg forgiveness if this has already been taken care of, but a couple of years ago, I was invited to attend a meeting of visually impaired people in the community. And there were a number of issues flagged by them, which I gave to staff, but I haven't seen any action on them. I'm not saying that there's no action being taken, but give you one example. And we can say that this isn't a facility, but it's all about making the community an inclusive community. It was cited as a very helpful thing for visually impaired people if the ramps down off the pavement onto the road for crossings were painted a certain color. That color would show through ice, snow, and it would help them guide where they were going. There was a number of examples. I don't say it, I'm looking at you there, but I don't know if I gave it to you, but I thought I may have made a report at council, but there's a listing of those things. So I would suggest that you get hold of a lady called Margaret Sutton, who facilitated the meeting, and talk to her about the visually impaired people and their needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion?
Oh, Your Worship.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Wilbur.
One thing that I've noted that was mentioned earlier was the High Five program, and that we actually have 2 staff who are certified in facilitating that program. And before, you know, kind of the pun to the pool, jumping off the deep end and looking at pilot projects and stuff, there are sensory issues that cross among a variety of people, whether they have autism or not, or maybe they just have sensory to sound and light. So I would actually be interested, rather than just what does it look like to have a pilot program, that further research is what does it look like to have our staff trained in the High Five program, so that they are identifying maybe areas or programs that could be across the board for the community and be much more inclusive, rather than picking one facility and running a pilot project. Having staff trained to recognize those sensory needs that we may have within our facilities, to me, would be, 1, a better use of money, and 2, more inclusive of the community.
Thank you. And so I'm not sure if that, Ross, is part of the staffing and training issues that you would consider as part of this, or is that, I think what Councillor Wilbur from the comment was that it's a broader component for all of our facilities and all of our services.
Thank you. Through your worship, certainly I think it could be applicable in any and all facilities we have. The request and direction from council was to or the pool rather was identified as a facility to pilot, if you will, or have a look. I'm also going to follow up. I know we have at least one trainer. I'll follow up and determine how many of our aquatic or recreation staff do have the High Five training. It's been in existence for a while, so I suspect we do have a number of individuals with that training, but we can have that conversation and see how that might apply. I think we start somewhere. I think it makes sense. The pool is a good area to start looking at that, and we can work out from there.
Thank you. Further discussion, sorry, Blair?
Just maybe looking for some clarification, Your Worship. As Ross indicated, we brought this back based on a request of council based on the Aquatic Centre to pursue that and the sensory issues there. We're happy to bring it back, but as I understand the motion, it is to look at that. I want to make sure, you want us to do the visually impaired work as well as the High Five program and the training for all employees at the city? I just want to make sure we capture the intent of council in this motion.
Yeah, I think it was, I'm going to speak on behalf of the mover, that it was the intent that we begin with this soft pilot and look at it from a controlled basis to begin with, see what the demand is, and scope that out in terms of cost and training and impacts to our facilities, and then to begin to move it further along depending on how the uptake is what I got. Councillor Earl?
Yeah, I mean, my motion was largely informed by the information Ross had provided around the various aspects of this and how it's being piloted and looked at in other communities. And obviously the High Five training you hope, at least with respect to the pool, that would be part of a report with respect to what the man hours are to get people trained up in that if they're not already, things of that nature. I don't want to micromanage. I'd just like something, if we are going to slowly begin dipping our toes into the water, as opposed to what Councillor Wilbur said, jumping up into the deep end, not the league or the pool analogies too much, but yeah, I mean, I would like to see, obviously, staff awareness as a component of that, regardless of what programming we roll out, and I'd like to see that as part of the report.
All right. Thank you.
Councillor Javetkov?
Yeah, I like the description that Ross gave about, getting an evening that's maybe quiet and setting something up in there. When you consider that there's nothing else going on in the province, everybody is doing research, I don't think you want to jump in with both feet and start, some major initiatives. This pilot project, I think, is something that will measure the need, and there'll be a lot of other things come out of it too. So I think it's, we should be limiting to that at this point.
Thank you. Further discussion, Blair?
If I could just add one thing, Your Worship, we will definitely bring back, following this discussion to our next meeting, the requirements here, but I want to make it clear, just in case the public are watching, that they may think the aquatic center is presently open. It isn't at this point. As we move through the COVID pandemic, we are looking for every opportunity we have to try and return to some normalcy, but at the present time, the aquatic center is not open.
And no expected timeline of when that will open either.
No.
Yeah. Thank you. Further discussion, comments? Anything on the phone, Amy or Councillor Wilbur? Sorry. Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Good work, Ross. Thank you for that. 7.2, we have a report number 20067 from the General Manager of Community Services regarding the Code of Conduct for City Facilities Policy. Councillor Parslow?
I move the report number 20-067 from the General Manager of Community Services re Code of Conduct for City Facilities Policy be received. Further, the Code of Conduct for City Facilities Policy attached to this report be approved pending the required 30-day review period.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Earl. Discussion. Councillor Parslow?
The attachments made reference to written material as well of an offensive nature. So does that include, therefore, social media?
Thank you, through your worship. It does not. Social media is, in my understanding, a different animal. Certainly very difficult to manage social media in this particular case. So I would say it does not. I suppose case by case, if we see something, and I suspect that using Facebook as an example, they typically will remove something that is vulgar or profane or something along those lines. But this policy does not speak to social media.
Go ahead.
Okay, so let me just read the part here. Examples of unacceptable conduct include but are not limited to the following. Conduct that is illegal or violates policies and procedures of the City of Dawson Creek. Refusal to follow the directions of staff. All those are very clear. Number 3, abusive, offensive or foul language, intoxication or name calling of patrons, participants, staff and volunteers within the City of Dawson Creek facilities, whether on the telephone, in person or in written communication. So should written communication be amended to be in letters or notes that exclude social systems, social network systems? Because we all know there's some pretty abusive stuff goes on, which I find pretty pathetic, totally unacceptable. Sometimes directed towards staff, sometimes directed to politicians. So how does this policy you're saying, it leaves the social networking alone? It excludes that from being a form of written communication?
Your worship, can I intervene here?
Yep.
It's Cindy. We do have a social media policy already that allows us, reserves us the right to remove any contents that contain vulgar language, personal attacks, or any kind. So we do have a council policy regarding social media at this time.
So I believe that would cover what Councillor Carswell is referring to.
Okay. Blair?
I guess just following through, your worship, on that, and to be very clear, we have the ability to block people too from our social media. So if they are going to be abusive, use foul language, be offensive, not only do we take it off, we'll block them from our site. We have no problem as a city, and you know, the whole part of democracy is the ability to have differing opinions, but do it in a respectful manner. So unfortunately, some people have a difficult time with that, and for that reason, we have certainly don't have the time for them here at the city if they're going to treat our staff or the individual elected officials within our city in a disrespectful manner. So, and that goes if my direction to our staff, if they receive a phone call of that sort, they're not to continue in that discussion.
Councillor Javetkov?
Yeah, this policy, from my understanding, was just directed at people that are actually attending our facilities. So it's nothing to do with social media or anything. It's people that are actually coming in to the facility and how they're expected to act there.
Councillor Wilbur, I just want to be clear in my understanding also that the social media policy is for the city's social media page and not our, I'll say, personal councillor pages that we have. Those pages are up to us to monitor on our own and allow people to make comments or take off comments that are maybe not polite, but that our policies actually only pertain to the city's social media.
Your worship, through you, yes, that's the intent. We have no jurisdiction on individuals.
Thank you. Further comments? Further question, Councillor Earl?
Just to get back to the policy we're considering, so I commend staff for coming up with this. I think I fully intend to support it. And to the public out there, obviously the idea of banning somebody from the use of public facilities isn't a decision any of us would arrive at lightly, or I certainly wouldn't. We build and operate these facilities for the express purpose of being utilized by our citizens to improve their quality of life. Unfortunately, as Blair mentioned, and as we're keenly aware, we saw in the example that's cited in this report and other instances, there are a few rare instances where a person thinks that because they pay their taxes and they've got a captive audience and our staff there trying to do their job, that they're entitled to subject our employees to all manner of unacceptable behavior. So the fact that someone chooses to work in public service and front line for a career doesn't make it okay. And I think the policies described in this document capture my expectations regarding the bare minimum conduct a person observes when they're a guest in our facilities. So I'm happy to support it, and I just wanted to encourage anyone watching on Facebook who might want to follow up, go to our website, read the policy yourself. Yeah, if you have any questions, follow up with us, but I just want to be clear, this isn't a decision we arrive at lightly, but we do have a responsibility to make sure that our staff feel safe and supported in their job.
Thank you. We have a code of conduct for our employees, and employees must act in a responsible manner. They have to abide by that code, and they could be terminated in certain circumstances for abuse or significant issues around that code of conduct. And we have a code of conduct for our employees, our contractors who come to work for the city, and how they must handle themselves with integrity and all of that, and they could lose their ability to work for the city. And we have a code of conduct for council, and leading to the point where if a councillor or a mayor was abusive, we could be censor that particular member. But we have no code of conduct for residents who abuse our employees or our community, and I think it's absolutely appropriate that we have that. 99 or 97%, 98% of the people who use our facilities are respectful and do it in a manner that's appropriate, that you appreciate, and I believe, honestly, there should be consequences for your actions. And I have absolutely zero issues with developing a code of conduct for people who are going to treat our community and the reputation of our community or our staff or our employees or our administration or council in a disrespectful, abusive manner, they should be banned from our facilities. They should be banned from the services that the residents of this community work hard and the business community work hard to provide. So I'm fully supportive of a code of conduct for this, and I appreciate the work staff have put into bringing it forward. Thank you. Any further comments, questions? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Blair, just one comment or question. Would it be complaint driven as well in terms of if somebody makes a complaint, like our bylaws, if somebody made a complaint to the city about a particular incident that occurred, then we would investigate it?
We would have to, through you, your worship, we would have to. I mean, I can only think of a situation I'll give you an example at one of our facilities. If somebody was acting in contrary to our code of conduct, I would expect that somebody would raise that with an official at the facility to begin with, and we would begin that addressing. It is, we live in a society where we have to look into everything we have, but many of the issues that we face are issues where some of the actions within this code of conduct are directed strictly right at our employees. So there's not a lot to look at in that case, but if it's some other way, we would certainly investigate.
Good, thank you. 7.3, we have report number 20069 from the General Manager of Development Services regarding our request for quotations. Councillor Javetkov?
I move that report number 20-069 from the General Manager of Development Services, request for quotations 2020-15, supply, delivery, and commissioning of one set of network-corrected real-time kinematics GPS equipment and accessories be received. Further, that Council award RFQ 2020-15 to 720 Instruments Limited, including the additional equipment for a total price of $27,300.61 plus applicable taxes.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Earl. Discussion, Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Your Worship. So through you to staff, just one or two questions with respect to the equipment we're considering purchasing. What historically is the life cycle of this stuff? How often are we having to replace it? I know in today's age, any kind of technology becomes obsolete the second you take it out of the box or within a few months, but what are we looking at as far as the life cycle is?
Yeah, through your worship, the current equipment we have, I believe, is probably 7 to 10 years old. So that's pretty typical, like you say, that when you're dealing with the electronic side, things do move quickly. But the reason for moving up is obviously the age, but also the added abilities that this gives us is our current system's based on a radio network. So if we get too far away from City Hall, such as we've had in the past to do some survey work out of the water treatment plant, or even as far out as some of our raw water reservoirs, and the radio network doesn't work. So this new system will allow through cellular network to enable us to do that.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. One or two more questions. So this is where we're gonna buy the entire package and save ourselves ideally $3,400 a year in annual subscription, which I think is great. One question I do have is, so from what I understand, it has a 3-year warranty. So that includes with respect to maintenance, repairs, anything like that. I just want to know, I guess what I'm getting at is, as opposed to the subscription, does having the entire system in-house, is it going to create any additional requirements for staffing around or necessary specialized training to keep and maintain this stuff, whereas I assume a $3,400 a year subscription would buy us that kind of tech support and maintenance, and we're going to have to provide that in-house, and what does that look like? And are we capable of doing it?
Right, so through your worship, with any of this survey type of equipment, we don't service or do any of that work in-house. With the warranty, obviously, we'll just send that out if there is an issue, and the service provider will take care of that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. 7.4, we have report number 20070 from the watershed coordinator regarding our flood mapping and mitigation report. So maybe have a motion to receive for discussion if we can. Councillor Earl, second Councillor Javetkov. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Blair, do you want to maybe kick us off?
Well, thank you, Your Worship. What I will start off certainly by starting and saying thank you to Chelsea. The work that you've done on this report is amazing. I think it is probably one of the deepest we've seen as a community. The work, and I'm sure everybody read it cover to cover. It's only 241 pages, I believe, is the amount. But water's huge in our watershed and how we look after things. One of the key services and one of the primary things that we deliver is a water source that is safe, that is one of the best in the country, and people should be proud of it. But the direct questions and so on, Your Worship, I know Chelsea is here as well as Kevin to go through this if there are direct questions of council. But again, certainly in my time, and I've been involved with the city for a number of years now, a very good document. Thank you, Chelsea.
Good. Thank you. Good morning, Chelsea.
Morning.
So maybe do you want to walk us through kind of the overview of the report and the highlights for us?
The broad strokes of
Sure.
240
So
pages.
I've only read it 3 times, trying to wrap my head around it as well. So I guess I'm going to start at the beginning is that we've been working on flood mitigation and mapping in response to the 2016 flood for the last 3 years. And we did our flood mitigation plan back in 2018. And what it did is it identified the need for flood maps and updating our flood maps, which were based on the 1974 event, which we did not know the size of. So it's hard to base something on something when you actually don't know what it represents. So in the last 2 weeks, we've received the flood mapping report from Edgewater. We received 100% grant funding for this project. And there's definitely multiple highlights. So the first goal of this was really to update flood maps. What gets wet where, what's the flood extent for different sized floods now, presently, and into the future. And then we got them to look at the 2016 event to try and characterize it for us. We got them to look at climate change and look at the geomorphological side of things. So that's the erosion side of things. Because we all know that our creek is not very stable. So walk you through from kind of the beginning is in 2016, our event based on Edgewater's analysis was a 76-year event. Now, currently all of engineering and construction is based off of 200-year events. Just a little bit of context there. In 2020, so we installed real-time monitoring at the 102nd Avenue Bridge. We were able to take that information and then look at the elevations that Edgewater gave us, and we had about a 2 to 5 year event for our freshet this year. So very small event. However, we were still trying to make decisions on what we should do at 102nd and 17th and monitoring them quite closely. So one of the biggest, I think, exciting takeaways of this is since 2016, we've upgraded 15th Street, 10th Street, Ministry of Transportation is upgrading 8th Street, and Snake Pit is pretty much complete now. And since we've done those upgrades and structural upgrades, we've actually seen the ability for the majority of the creek to handle really large flood events. So anything downstream of 102nd, because it's more of an incised, deeper channel, can handle like a 200-year event without really large overtopping because we are upgrading these things. But when we get to 102nd and anything upstream, so 102nd, 17th Street, this includes Tubby's RV Park, Rotary Lake, anything, anything over a 50-year event or 20% chance of happening every year, we will have overtopping at both of the crossings, 102nd and 17th, plus we will have water pooling and sitting on the different pieces of land or points of interest, as it says in the report. Do you want me to stop for questions there? And
Sure.
we can like
If-
keep going?
If we
if you
can.
want to?
And
Okay.
so Councillor Parslow had a question, and we'll try and carry it from there. Go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a couple of points you've already made that I either there are updates or something, but I remember being told by a hydrologist at some meeting or other that all these improvements, he said, downstream from 15th Street would help, but up from 15th Street. He said it's those downstream things won't help. But now you're saying just 102nd Avenue's the pinch point.
Yeah, it's pretty much upstream of the confluence. So kind of just behind the driver house is the confluence of the
Yes.
main channel and the South Dawson. And so as soon as you get to 102nd, you get that low lying area. We don't have a deep channel. And so we have more floodplain. So we see that just with all flood events, whether they be rain or snow melt, we just have our elevations there can't capture as much water. But with the upgrades, we are seeing more water is going to be able to move through at a quicker pace, higher velocity, so there's not as much risk to flooding.
But increased risk for erosion.
Correct.
Just if I continue with that, so this year's freshet, you described it, correct me if I'm wrong, as a 2 to 5 year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now we came very close, did we not, to having to for the water to be going over
At 17th Street.
17th Street.
Yeah. So at 17th Street, we were just hitting the bottom of the crossing. So there's probably another foot or so before we were going to have water coming over. And at 102nd, the culverts are very interesting because they don't sit level with each other. One's higher than the other. So the lower culvert was full capacity flowing. The higher culvert was about 50%, and we had 1.2 meters still before we would overtop there. The one thing I will say about that is if we overtop at 102nd, that also means that the whole area between 102nd and 17th is most likely backed up to the same level as the top of that top culvert. So it's kind of like it flows through the lower culvert, and then everything has to back up until it can flow through the second culvert. So high water.
The last question is, how do they calculate you say the flooding of, what was it, the last flooding is a 76-year precedence event. How do they calculate?
Well, if you'd like to go to section... No, I'm just joking.
Had you read the report at section?
It's obviously...
Annual exceedance probably.
Yeah, there's a really large section. The hardest struggle with doing flood mapping up here is we don't have a lot of data. And the data we have is very limited. So the data we have on the Dawson Creek is like 5 or 6 years back in the 70s, right at the confluence. Other than that, there hasn't been a long extended time period. So they take all the different reports that have been done by the Ministry of Transportation as well as Urban Systems for us, and then they look at our catchment size, and they compare it to other catchments in the region, try and find ones that are the same size, same type of topography. Then they do an analysis on it and go from there. But it is fully broken down in section, I'm not sure, 4 or 5.
Just a
Thank you.
question I can imagine people asking me, how do they
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so that is kind of the summary of what our past events were this year, and then our existing conditions. So then we asked Ebwater as an additional component is to run some simulations to understand different mitigation options for the 102nd crossing. Okay, I'm going to give you the current condition of the 102nd crossing before we get into the mitigation options. So the first one is when we looked at it from a geomorph perspective, so how the channel has changed over time, between 102nd and 17th, we've seen 26% of the channel being decreased. So it's been straightened. It doesn't meander. It doesn't have the nice bends in it anymore. That's a challenge because it can't hold as much water. When you straighten something, it just doesn't have the capacity. We're also seeing upstream deposition. So we're seeing sediment being deposited upstream. And then we're seeing increased erosion downstream because we have culverts. And that's what culverts tend to do. Into the future, we're going to see the channel shifting. We're going to see the channel moving as it will. Now, under our current condition, we can only handle up to that 50-year event without it going over, which will remain the same if we upgrade the bridge to a larger crossing of what the recommendation is, 12 meters. So the preferred approach is a 12-meter clear span bridge at 102nd. However, this will not change the fact that your 50-year flood event is your cap. What it will change is it'll allow water to move through a lot quicker. It'll allow the channel to kind of reach a new equilibrium. I know previously we were concerned about the downstream effects of that, and the geomorphologists, so the erosion specialists, looked at that and said, no, it'll be okay. That's a good thing. It will help with that. But if we have a flood event that's larger than the 50-year event, so 2016 or higher, we will still have water overtopping 102nd, and we will still have water overtopping 17th Street. The only way to mitigate that would be to combine the upgrade of a bridge with upstream storage. So we would create upstream storage somewhere on the Dawson Creek main channel. Could be in city land, could be regional district. There's been a lot of creek straightening in the past, and that would suffice. So their magic golden number for upstream storage was 9,000 cubes. Now in our minds, we'd like to build reservoirs. So 9,000 cubes seems like, okay, that's not hard. But I think finding the land could be a challenge there. They also recommended maybe rather than building a reservoir as like a dugout or whichever that we're used to, is maybe just looking at increasing the meanders or the bends in the channel upstream, because then it can just handle more water and you're creating more like environmental positive impacts, etc., natural assets there. So if you just did the bridge, it would help with the geomorph aspect into the future. It would help with erosion. If you did a combination with a 9,000 cubic meter upstream, then we would not see overtopping at 102nd for a 200-year event, which is a very large event. However, you would still see issues at 17th Street, and you would still see issues, like you would still have flooding. It's just your crossing would be okay at 102nd. So I guess what I'm getting to is that this is quite complicated, but there's options. Yeah.
Just on the creek straightening, could you let them know overall how much is lost in the creek over the years?
So from 1959 until 2009, we saw 31% decrease in our creek channel length. So what that means is when we reduce the channel length, we reduce the capacity for us to be able to store water and slow water down. Yeah, that would be the main thing. The main areas that have seen the most creek straightening has been the golf course, as well as 102nd Avenue to 17th Street, and then downstream of the mall, mostly in the landfill area. So, and that's a really cool Appendix E. There's some really cool maps, and they show all the different all the different ortho photos or aerial photos over the years.
Very good. Questions? We'll stop there.
So all that is naturally, through natural forces.
No, a lot of it is human caused as well. I don't have the specifics on how much percentage is each, but a lot of it is human caused channelization. So in the rural areas, we have a lot of channelization for the field drainage.
To the city part.
Yeah, the city part, there's some ski hill drainage.
Kevin?
So through your worship, within the city limits, there was certainly a lot of straightening completed by the city or others.
By who?
By either the city or others. I found a map in the vault a number of years ago from the 60s that actually showed all the projects of the straightening of the creek, because I believe there was a belief that straightening it quicker, moved it more efficiently, less chance of flooding, which is what we're learning, is that's the exact opposite of what should have occurred. And like I said, there was a number of projects initiated by the city, and there was probably a lot of private landowners that back in the day, made some changes again with that same belief system. We have a number of properties outside the city, upstream, that have over time, not just the golf course, but others that have filled, changed, altered the creek in ways that has shortened it and straightened it.
Isn't that all around the wharf?
Today, probably it is, but before it wasn't.
1960s.
So it was, it's good to know that we weren't part of any straightening of the creek in recent history.
Yeah. Councillor
Even
Earl?
though some councillors wanted to do that.
Councillor Earl?
Thank you, Worship. Greetings, Chelsea. So, what I gather, we do a bunch of stuff to mitigate the challenges we're going to have at 102nd, but 17th is a big flag there, no matter what we do.
I think we need to look at it further. So if we're going to look at mitigation options for 102nd, that was the main goal of this analysis. 17th Street was a secondary thing that they threw in, but there might be other options. And there's structural mitigation and there's non-structural mitigation, which I think is another part that we can look at too.
Some properties are in a floodplain, and at some point, no matter what you do with infrastructure, enough water comes, properties are going to flood.
Correct.
Back, primarily from 102nd back. Upstream.
Yes. When you do hit the 200-year event, though, there are maps in the report. You will see other areas as well that will be flooding, which we're used to.
Yeah. Sorry, Blair, did you have a comment? And then Councillor Javetkov.
Go ahead, Councillor Javetkov.
Councillor Javetkov?
So I'm just wondering about this storage, the 9,000 cubes. So you've got Freshet, for example, and you divert the water into this reservoir, so you save 9,000 cubes, but Freshet still goes on. So once that's full, are you still not getting flooding? Or is it planned that you don't fill that reservoir until sort of the peak of Freshet, so that it extends through? Like the philosophy of it, I'm missing the.
So I think that it would obviously need to be looked at, and the questions you're asking would be, do we operate something? Do we increase the meanders of the creek somewhere where it's safe, so it can just hold more water naturally? I don't know. We haven't looked at that in detail whatsoever.
I guess specifically with a rain event, like we had here a couple of years ago, you got, 4 days of heavy rains or 5 days. Once that reservoir is full, you've still got water coming. So yeah, you're holding some water that you may be able to sell to the oil patch later, but you're still getting water, so the flood is still potentially going to happen. I just look at up at the ski hill, like we've got a reservoir that's, doesn't hold 9,000 cubes, but it holds a lot of water. So we fill it up, but drainage is still going on. So the reservoir is full, but there's still lots of water coming after that, that's going somewhere. So
Kevin?
I guess I just missed the, how it works or what the thinking is.
Kevin?
Yeah, so through your worship, I mean, you're right, but the philosophy is to have that storage to a size that it wouldn't fill and then everything carry on. It's the idea of slowing it down. So that capacity, whatever that is, whether it's a marsh or a meandering creek or a reservoir, is to carve off some of that flow, hold it, slow it down so that what's coming to town is less. And so it has to be sized accordingly. You're absolutely correct. You don't want it to just fill and then everything just keeps going right, bypassing that reservoir. So whatever that storage is has to be sized to continually carve off a certain amount of flow until you've reached that peak and you start going down and it slowly starts to release that. And currently we have a great one, which is called the golf course. And as you see when you get these events, it is completely flooded. If we did not have that, the situation in town would be considerably worse.
9,000 cubes doesn't seem like a very big, like some of the reservoirs we built are a million cubes, right?
The largest one is South Dawson's at 1 million.
Yeah.
But no, you're right, 9,000 doesn't sound like a lot. What that says to me is you just, according to their calcs, and we'd have to dig into that deeper, but it's the potential of moving some off stream, slowing it, releasing it. It has that impact.
It would be really interesting, honestly, I think for us, when we talk about that, we've lost 30% of the creek channel. And to me, it would be really interesting for us to do a walk, spend a day and see the land and have the ebb water with you guys explain that channel, why, here's your risk areas, here's why it is. Give us some of that real, for council to be able to then, because I'm with Councillor Jureka, putting 9,000 cubes in off the side I don't get that infrastructure planning of how that would mitigate or minimize the risk. So to me, that would be helpful to see it. I'm so visual like that. Councillor Jureka?
So how many cubes does our new reservoir that Node's built there, how many cubes does that hold?
A million.
A million? Okay, so it's way smaller than that.
Well, the trail reservoirs, the two of them are 25,000 cubes each, aren't they?
I think there's 60,000.
Total, into two
Yeah.
cells?
Yeah.
Yeah. Councillor Earl?
So just, to clarify, I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot, and with your worship, I'd go for a hike to get a better appreciation of the scale and some of the details. But it does sound like the philosophy is essentially geared around buying yourself time, right? It's not how much you can hold, it's how much it slows the inflow of water to, and then it would release automatically as well. I'd be down for a walk.
Sorry, Chelsea?
Thank you. The other component is we don't have to do both right away. You could look at staging this. There's also quite a bit of funding, or there was pre-COVID, for natural asset development and looking at green spaces and being able to curb climate change into the future. So there could be possible funding into the future for that type of storage as well.
Yeah, I think it'd be really interesting for us to see and understand that, because to me, I think I still have got it in my head that 102nd crossing, and either add capacity to that to reduce that channel, whether you build a bridge or whether you put a third culvert, whatever, to add capacity. But I was really intrigued by this storage piece, diverting into some storage of some sort. And to me, there's all kinds of really interesting, intriguing options then when you think about that in terms of how, if you could find the right location in the right area that would give us the opportunity to divert, capture, slow, as well as create some asset that might be really valuable. Councillor Parsons?
Yes, I agree with you. I think I saw a partnership with Ducks Unlimited and some wetland, but I've always thought that you, just like Grand Prairie, you store, you control by storing and then releasing when downstream has the capacity to take it. So it wouldn't be perpetually, you keep some minimum levels, but you also release.
Yeah.
But it could be a nice sandy beach that we could pretend we're in Mexico.
Fill it in the springtime, use it in the summer, and get rid of it in the fall, and
That's right.
get her ready for spring. Yeah. Blair?
Your Worship, and I know Chelsea touched on this earlier, the work that's been done to date at 15th Street, 10th Street, the Snake Pit, all in an effort to try and correct or help correct the situation that we face. The other one that was mentioned is 8th Street, and I'm not sure everybody is aware, but there will be a bridge going in just to the south of Cal Tire on the 8th Street portion by the mall. That work will begin this fall. They are going to be doing the utility work through the summer, as I understand it, but they will then, at some point this fall prior to winter, remove 2 lanes, I believe is my understanding. So really just for information, and part of the reason for that is following our discussion here today. But for the public and the traveling public, we will be down to 2 lanes at that point by the mall. I know they're working on traffic patterns and what they'll be doing for traffic control, but all of this in an effort to help alleviate some of the problems we're talking about here today.
One other thing we haven't talked about is the erosion, and so when I think about what Snake Pit, and I think Blair mentioned it in terms of when you look at what the Snake Pit did and how they've rip-wrapped the shores through there to help protect and encapsulate some of the erosion control with that big riprap, and so obviously Site C are bringing in millions of tons of riprap. Is there an opportunity for us to somehow program that in to do some erosion control with riprap and look at partnering somehow with that? Was that part of this, and was there any studies done where we've got some high vulnerability areas for residents or slope stability that we should be thinking about?
So for this study, they mostly looked at channel changes over time and then associated geohazards, so areas that could become landslides. There were quite a few items noted where downstream of the mall we could potentially have a large landslide or a geohazard that could cause water backing up. And so that was kind of a secondary hazard that they identified. Secondly, there are a couple areas of the Dawson Creek walking trail with, if current patterns persist, we could have erosion impacting certain areas of the walking trail. And then they did recommend looking at depth of cover over a few of our infrastructure projects, or not projects, but our pipes, because again, erosion could impact them. In regards to riprap specifically, that's mostly around infrastructure projects, and it's something that we could look at for all future infrastructure projects, just to make sure, but that's usually included in that work. And then I'll pass it to Kevin for some of the other areas we know of concern.
Yeah, so through your worship, I mean, the report identified, there are some properties that we have responded to in the past that have concerns about that creek eating away at or close to their property lines, whether that's in Willowbrook. I can think of some south of 102nd, down towards 108th. There's a few areas that are definitely has some challenges and will into the future with erosion.
I just wondered if there was any critical aspects to the report they identified that we should be looking at. And I just think, honestly, the visual aspect of how they've created that riprap really does make and keeps the channel in place, protects infrastructure, and is visually much more appealing. Councillor Javekov?
So I just wanted to confirm the storage then for that 9,000 cubes, that would have to be upstream from the hard highway?
It'd have to be upstream of the 102nd crossing.
Upstream of 102nd.
Yeah, so it could be the hard highway, it could be city limits, it could be rural. So the Dawson Creek main channel runs all the way out pretty much to Besborough landfill. So, I mean, obviously the closer you get to town, the more impact you're going to have because there's going to be more water caught. but there's multiple options, and the 9,000 number too is based off their modeling, so we can play with that as much as we want to.
Just another question on the responsibility. I mean, is the city responsible for erosion on private property?
Is that a trick question?
I know the rivers, they're not.
No, they're not. I think a lot would probably have to go into the issue of, was the creek straightened? Was it dealt with? There are a number of factors that would come into play to give a legal answer to that, Your Worship.
Yeah, I think honestly, to me, we're doing this work because we want to mitigate flood risk and flood planning and mapping and all that. And our objective is to minimize that to all property owners. And to me, erosion control is one of those things. We do some stuff, we're going to speed up. If we speed up water and it creates more erosion, we want to protect the properties, our properties and resident properties as much as possible, I think. Flooding has many components to it, and this has been crazy interesting to me in terms of how good the work has been and the information has been. So, Councillor Earl?
I was just going to start moving some motions. I want to know if I can move all four together, or we're doing them one at a time.
Let me just grab them up. Let's do them, would you prefer them one at a time, Blair? Yeah?
Yes, Your
Yeah.
Worship.
Okay,
All
good.
right. I'll, before I do that, just to echo the sentiments of some of the councillors here, this is a really phenomenal report, probably one of the most robust I've seen in my time on council, and I'll certainly have to give it a few more reviews to digest it, because it's very, very dense with information, but really, really well done. So kudos to you guys. So I'll move that report number 20-070 from the Watershed Coordinator regarding flood mapping information be received. Further, staff be directed to proceed with the following flood mitigation actions, and I'll move motion 1, present council with 102nd Avenue upgrade project estimate.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Javetkov, discussion? Councillor Parslow and then Councillor Javetkov?
Yeah, I'm wondering why we're not including 17th Street at the same time.
Kevin?
Through your worship, we can certainly do that, and it's probably, looking at this now, probably prudent to do so. We should do it in concert with each other.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking.
And I don't believe that'll cost, there won't be a significant increase in cost to do, look at both initially.
I'd like to make an amendment.
That we add the 17th Street Bridge
Yes.
upgrade as well. Yes? So we have a mover and a seconder and an amendment to the motion. Discussion, Councillor Javetkov?
I'm just wondering about the bridge designs. Like you said that it didn't matter if we replaced the culverts with a bridge, we're still going to get that water backing up at 102nd. And I can't visualize that. I mean, those two culverts, the volume that they take, if you have an open span, and I think you said 12 meters, how would that still back up the water? I mean, that would take, 10 times, 20 times the amount of water that would go through those two culverts.
So from my understanding, it's not, so yes, you've increased how much water can move through there, but because the area is so low lying that it acts as a floodplain, so water only moves into that area so quickly, is one. And then the open bottom channel, the benefit of that is being able to move some of the sediment that's upstream of the culvert right now and get it through the system, so we can increase capacity over time into the future.
So if that's the case, I mean, that is a level crossing now, wouldn't it make sense to lift it up a foot or something? To make sure that that it doesn't back the water up, because that was one of the problems.
Yeah, and that's,
So, through your worship, and that will be part of the design, and look at that and see if that has an appreciable favorable impact. But it speaks to, I think you could raise that up as much as you like, and at some point, at a 50-plus event, the bridge itself or the roadway will be dry, but it might be wet on either side of it still, because again, it's a low-lying area, so those levels are going to come up throughout that whole area. And at some point, like Chelsea indicated, you can only move so much water through there, and it's going to spread out, and there's going to be properties that possibly get wet. But that would be part of going through the design process.
2016, the water would have been flowing over the bridge if it was raised 2 feet or 3 feet. That was that high, right?
I don't believe it.
Councillor Parcel.
Well, doubting Thomas over there. The reason I include the 17th Street is, part of it is there's some key core pieces of infrastructure that we need to protect linked to that 17th Street, right? That's why the pumping truck was brought in a couple of years ago to relieve that. The other reason for the 17th Street is that if you're going to have any backup, right? I mean, just a slightly stronger freshet than this year, you're into it. I mean, 1 foot, I think you said that approximately, was how much leeway we had this year. That's not much, right? I mean, if one heavy snowfall event in the spring could make all the difference. And so I do think we need to push that forward, as well as the 102nd Avenue.
But the banks along there, through the old Dr. Bowen's office, through there, they're at that level. So once you get up there, they're going, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Further discussion?
Maybe we should abandon it.
Ready for the question?
So are we including?
Yes, we're including 17th Street as the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? It's carried, thank you. And on the main motion, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried, thank you. Item 2 is investigate the viability of upstream storage. Councillor Earl?
We'll make that motion.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Parslow. Upstream storage is storage from 17th Street upstream to provide some options as a secondary component of infrastructure. Yes? Councillor Parslow?
So I don't know if this is needed, but I would really hope that when we're doing this, we look at partnerships, potential partnerships, such as Ducks Unlimited. I'm also thinking for recreation purposes. I mean, Rotary Lake has been lost. I would love, in my hopes for the community, to have a nice water hole there that is safe and could be used for swimming and sunbathing. Maybe that's crazy, but let's look at it whilst we're looking at this storage. What are the options?
All right, we can do that.
Thank you. Further discussion? Councillor Dweck?
So is there a budget attached to that, or is it open-ended? You just
Unlimited.
unlimited?
They're going to bring it back, and then council we'll start to look at partnerships, infrastructure grants, budget, all of that. This is just looking at options at this point. Kevin?
So through your worship, I think on the storage piece, the next step in the viability would be to come back to council with the areas that would be identified. We'd have to go through a bit of a study to say, here's the top 2 or 3 sites that would, be most beneficial for storage. That's where we would start. So I think we'd have to spend a little bit of money, obviously, to go through that process. That'd be first step before we come back to council.
So we have 80 acres at the Chamberlain Nature Park on the far west side of town. And so to me, and that could take some pressure off of the 17th Street, the south arm of the creek where it comes in from the south. And in there, to me, there's a big piece of land that's low. Nature Park, you could put a 5-10 acre water catchment area in there that would be a huge multifaceted asset to me that Creek flows that way. Anyway, it's just a not. Further discussion? All those in favor? Chelsea's thinking, all opposed? Carried, thank you. Item 3, update plans and policies with upgraded flood maps and recommendations from Ebwater. Councillor Parslow, second. Councillor Earl, discussion?
Your Worship, are we going to add number 4 is that as it does state and continue work on non-structural mitigation? Seems to be one piece.
Okay with that, if Councillor?
Sure.
Yeah? Administration, you got no issues with combining them?
No, we can make that work, Your
Okay,
Worship.
thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wilbur. So we're moving 3 and 4 combined. Okay with the mover and the seconder? Discussion?
So I'm assuming in making the motion that there's continued grants going to be flowing through to support this work.
Well, it was, honestly, it was one of the things that in January before all this started, that I'd made contact with the Deputy Minister of Emergency Management, Laurie Halls. And I want to go down and we had a really strong relationship with the Deputy Prior, Becky. And I think it's worthwhile for us to go down and meet with the Deputy as soon as we can. They've been very supportive of this. I know they love the work that we've been doing on the city and leverage that with the province for infrastructure planning, future planning work. And I know that I've heard this, and Chelsea can talk about it, is the work that Ebwater and Dawson Creek have been doing now on this flood planning is used as a pilot and a discussion for lots of the work going around the province and nationally. So I think it's worth our while to make that contact with the deputy in the province as well as federally for any infrastructure grants as well as planning grants to continue this work. And it would be my intention, I'm going to follow it up with the deputy, and she said come anytime, right? Look forward to having the discussion, and then the coronavirus hit us and no traveling, but we certainly will make contact with them and continue that work and relationship. Blair?
Your Worship, just following up on that, any opportunity that we have as a city to access grants to help us pursue this work, you can be rest assured, I know our staff are always on that. Any opportunities, as was raised by Councillor Parslow, for example, with Ducks Unlimited for wetland development, I know they're always receptive to looking at that. So we will pursue all opportunities, and not just for the ability to access grants, but as I said, through Ducks Unlimited, who do a great deal of work and beneficial work for communities and regions all over.
Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Do you think it would be worthwhile for us to reach out to Hydro on this riprap stuff, where they're bringing in gazillions of tons of that big shale riprap from the pass into Site C for the construction of that? They're bringing it in by train. That it'd be worthwhile to explore that a little bit to see if we could ever find a way to leverage some of that riprap for us. Kevin, Blair, Chelsea?
Your Worship, we can reach out to them to see if there's a willingness, whether it be near the end of the project, at the beginning, but we will make that call and that inquiry and let you know.
Because if we could get them to, if we could get some in a partnership, and I know that they've been, it might be worthwhile for us to explore it, to have a storage place someplace to store some of that stuff to have and utilize for the creek stabilization.
There may be the opportunity as well with the Ministry of Transportation doing the 8th Street project.
Yeah.
They'll be looking for a significant or a fair amount of riprap as well on both sides of that new facility.
Yeah. Good, okay. So it's 10:30, we'll take a 7-minute recess. Thank you. Ladies, will be 7 minutes on the phone. And back to our agenda. Item 7.5, we have report number 20071 from the city planner regarding a temporary use permit.
Keep doing this one, don't we?
Councillor Earl?
Received for discussion, Your Worship.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Jvetkov? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Go ahead. Councillor Earl?
Oh, I was just, I mean, from what I gather in the report, this is a piece of property that has been repeatedly applied applied for temporary use permit for this particular thing, and I mean, I don't disagree with anything in the report. If there's any additional information staff wants to provide, I'd be happy to hear it.
Your worship, maybe I'll speak to this
Sure.
briefly. So certainly, this property has been gone through numerous temporary use permit applications. The individual is back, has a wish to use it long-term for a certain use, but another opportunity has arisen. We have, as you can see by the report and the recommendation contained, should it pass council, inform the individual that this would be the last temporary use permit. We would like to see it either utilized or rezoned for what it is. And because of the time we're in, definitely plays. I mean, this is something that sees an opportunity for economic benefit to the community in the region, and thus the recommendation is what it is, which is to accept it in this term, but then to inform the owner that in future we would consider rezoning applications.
Councillor Earl, then Councillor Javetkov.
Just for a piece of clarification for myself, in the report, it states that should the owner choose to rezone, there's nothing in the rezoning that would really preclude him from continuing to use it in the manner he's applying for a temporary permit for, would there? Like, he'd still be able to do what he's doing. It's just he doesn't want to rezone because he'd like to keep it for some development over the long term.
In the future, yes.
In the interim period, he's getting these offers to use it as essentially a storage site or a staging site for large projects. Why not take the money when I get it? But if he were to rezone, he then, the property would not be available for development moving forward, is his concern?
For the type of development he was looking for in the future. As I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but the individual is, and we've seen this use out there before, many times over the years, but, and again, based on what rezoning application he would like to put forward, should it take. If you rezoned it to the permitted use that we're giving the temporary use for, then yes, he could continue. But it's my understanding that's not the long-term use that the individual or the owner sees for this property. If that makes sense. Kevin, anything to add?
No, through your worship, I think you've covered that.
Councillor Javetkov.
So it's zone, what is it zoned for right now? Multiple families or?
Commercial.
Commercial.
Oh, it's
Highway
zoned for
commercial.
Highway commercial?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought it was for, I think the original intent was to put condos down there or something for around the golf course.
Many years ago, I believe that was an intent that I'd heard, yes.
Yeah. I guess it really doesn't matter. I mean, it's not a sort of a residential area, so if it's rezoned to commercial or light industrial or whatever, right? This year is industrial, like.
This activity is stored, yes,
Yeah.
and what we've seen in the past.
And the impacts of commercial, highway commercial versus light industry in terms of benefits or issues for the landowner. Taxation would be exactly the same tax rates, or in fact more less for light industry than they were commercial, right?
Yeah, well, yeah.
So you're just more restrictive in terms of what you could build on light industry than commercial, highway commercial?
Yeah.
Well, so through your worship, I mean, it's a different set of uses, and I think the proponent has, as Blair indicated, been looking long-term for possibly, a commercial use, or even maybe looking to rezone to, as Councillor Javetkov indicated, maybe a future residential use, but for whatever reason that hasn't occurred, and as these come along, as far as taxation, I believe assessment looks at it separate to zoning and will look at use. So even if it was zoned residential, but used as agriculture, they will tax it as agriculture, or assess it, sorry, as agriculture.
And there is no restriction on how many temporary use permits a property owner can apply for a property?
no formal number, but at some point you reach the decision of a council based on this. How many times would they want to entertain that? Before you say what we've done in this recommendation, say, look, we've accommodated this. We're in certainly trying circumstances here in the environment we find ourselves in. This is going to create economic activity. We'll consider it again. But under the Act, no formal number.
Or in our policy within the city in terms of the number of, and the only reason I ask that is because I know the RD are just dealing with that, and they've set it at 2. You can apply for 2, because you get camps that are just continually, they're not temporary use anymore, that's the permanent use. And I would look at this and say, in the last 10 years, it's probably the principal use of this property has been industrial use, right?
Most definitely.
Yeah. Councillor Parslow?
Well, that's a good thought. Maybe we need to do that. But I'd like to propose the motion if you feel we've had sufficient discussion.
Go, yep.
Okay, I move that report 20-071 from the city planner, read temporary use permit 20-02, application Gary Loisel, 2041 and 2101 Alaska Highway, be received. Further, the TUP 20-02 be approved for 2041 and 2101 Alaska Highway for a storage yard, temporary offices and personnel parking for a period of 24 months. Further, that due to the extended time frame and multiple permitted applications of the proposed use on the property, that staff be directed to advise the applicant that, should they wish to continue the proposed use beyond the term of the proposed TUP, they will be required to apply for a zoning bylaw amendment.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Earl, discussion? Ladies on the phone, any discussion? Ready for the... any further comments, questions? Ready for the question, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. 7.6, we have report 2005 from the General Manager of Development Services regarding asphalt patching report. Councillor Javetka?
I'll move the recommendation, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Wilbur, moving the recommendation. Second? Councillor Javetka. Discussion? Kevin?
So through your worship, what we've put in front of you is a request for some additional funding through the potential savings of the 15th Street project. Engineering staff has been out early this spring again and identifying areas of need, and as council and I'm sure the public will attest, there are a number of them out there, and what we've identified with our list is obviously a significant number, well over $1 million that we could go out there and patch. Obviously of varying degrees. What we're seeking from council is, potentially an additional $400,000 to go with the 200 that we have. That would give us a patching budget of just over $600,000. And it certainly would help us get some of the worst areas done, prioritized. We currently have a contract with Peter Brothers Construction to do the patching for the city. I've reached out to their superintendent and talked to him prior to putting in the report, because I wanted to ensure that if I was going to seek some additional funding, that they had the capacity to do the work, because of course I realized there would be some expectations from council and the public that if we're going to put some extra resources towards it, that they would as well. And what they've said is yes, obviously they're more than willing to take on the additional work, but they did qualify that with saying that, with this sort of request that I'm seeking, that they wouldn't obviously be able to spend that $600,000 in the next month. They would certainly tackle the priorities that we give them early, but that this funding would be spent throughout the summer. So I just want to be clear to council and the public that it's not going to happen all at once, and that's just a reality of their resources as well. They've also indicated that if needed, they could bring in some subcontractors to assist, but nonetheless, it's not all going to be finished by June.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. Councillor Javetka?
I think this is a good idea, doing some of this, especially the paving patching type work extends the life of the streets. So you get another, 20 years or whatever out of it. I'd like to see it even, there's probably 100 locations on that map. If it works out that there's possibility for additional work, I'd like to see you come back for additional money this year. It depends on the weather too, a lot of it, so if you get a good summer,
Yeah. Councillor Parslow?
Obviously, there's a pressing need for something to be done. I just would like to know, because I have the impression, and it's just an impression, that we patch up some pieces of road only to have to redo them the following year. Yet, I've also read that, in support of something Councillor Javatkov said, when we had that study done of our road system, that patchwork does, this repair work does extend the life of roads. So that, on the one hand, that's the statement, which I have to accept, but there seems to be some roads that seem to be at the same areas redone time and time again. We got some new equipment for patching. Was it last year or the year before?
Last year.
Last year. So I heard from the previous CEO that people were very pleased with that piece of equipment. Is that improving the longevity of some of these problem areas, that equipment?
So through your worship, initially, yes. The piece of equipment we purchased last year is relatively small and really tailored towards potholes specifically. And it provides a hot mix, and those patches do hold up a lot better than a temporary cold mix type of solution. So that does definitely help. We are looking at purchasing this year what is called a hot box, which would enable Public Works to go purchase hot mix from someone like Peter Brothers, and then utilize that for patching as well. And that hot box keeps the mix warm for a couple of days, enables our crews to go out and do more of those pothole fixes, which with hot mixes, a more permanent solution is better. The reason we have chronic areas are usually a result of water issues.
Yeah.
Which now means we, when we go into those areas, patching a pothole isn't sometimes the only solution. And yes, if we continue to have water on the road, we will continue to have issues regardless. So we have to look at that as well, and that drives cost. So as an example, 15th Street capital project, north of Alaska, north of the rail, doesn't have any storm sewer, and hence a lot of water runs down 15th Street, and that's why you have some real problem areas on the 96th and 95th intersections, because water runs through there continually, you get pothole development. So we're spending a significant amount of money in this project to address that by doing new underground infrastructure to carry away drainage. So as we go to some of these other existing areas, we have to look at that, and if possible, we can address that drainage, but sometimes we can't without a significant infrastructure upgrade, because maybe the drainage infrastructure isn't proximate and we have to bring that from somewhere else. So we do our best to try and manage that, but there's a lot of factors that come into it, but we are definitely looking at it with that lens of trying to get the longevity out of it. And Councillor Javatkov is correct. By going in and patching it, it buys us some time. Ideally, we'd go in and redo the entire street wherever these issues are, but we just don't have the funding, so a patch buys us time.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you for your excellent answer. But, we all hate seeing money wasted, and but as you say, sometimes they're not straightforward issues to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you. Blair?
Your Worship, just for clarity on this as well, the $400,000, we will be moving from capital to operations. This falls under the operating budget, so the PRA allocation is impacted slightly as a result of this work. It is, although it's capital work, it falls under operating because of the patch scenario.
Just terminology. You can do whatever you want with it.
Just wanted to, you're very flexible today, Councillor Javetkov.
Are you ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. 7.7, we have report number 20076 from the General Manager of Development Services regarding potential shovel-ready projects. Councillor Javetkov,
Received for information
for discussion or information?
or discussion.
Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Earl. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Go ahead.
Is that terminology, Councillor Director?
That's terminology.
I caught him.
So, by the looks of the report, we've got 2 projects that are shelf-ready now. I would like to see both of them put on the list for applications. I don't know when the intake is or what the criteria are, but they're both ready. To do anything with the other ones, we're looking at probably close to $800,000 in engineering costs. I don't know how much money we've got available that we haven't already budgeted. If there is some, then we should be selecting some of those streets out of the priorities as well. But those are all, the streets that have been identified are all sort of in the queue for future, right?
Sure. So, Councillor Earl?
No, go ahead, Your Worship.
No, I just was going around.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Thank you. So, yeah, just through you to staff, couple questions for clarification. So in the report around Michael's subdivision, it says, I'll pull it up here so I'm not quoting it. The underground loan for this project will approximately 10 million. The designs are to a point that the grant application could be submitted. So is that referencing just the underground or the entire Michael's subdivision upgrade, which is, I believe, pegged at about 24 million?
Yeah.
Yeah, so through your worship, the entirety is, my understanding, if I remember correctly, is we have a complete design, but the underground was kind of that first
Okay.
phasing that you'd want to tackle first, and 10 million is a large project,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I was just looking for some clarification on that. And with respect to being that we are in a somewhat unprecedented situation with COVID around the what we can guess at, hopefully maybe the federal and provincial governments might be able to do around packages for infrastructure. But are you, and I understand that shovel-ready is kind of the standard when it comes to stuff like this, but is there any precedent or instance you're aware of where grants are available for engineering work of the nature that we need to get done on some of those other projects in this instance, or the requirements of the application are loosened to allow for things that maybe aren't as far along as they normally would be? Is that kind of unprecedented?
Yeah, so through your worship, typically, that's their first screening processes that you've done that work. There are some planning grants available, but they're usually like a $10,000 grant where the city contributes $2,500 and they get, $7,500. So I guess the long answer is no.
The treatment plant as an example, we doubled the capacity of it. We had the engineering all done, and all of a sudden, province says we're got some federal provincial money available for grants, and anybody that has the engineering and project ready, and you're able to get them in there. It's usually not the engineering component of it. So, Councillor Parslow.
I know that other municipalities in this region use their fair share money for engineering work. Is that something that our finance officer sees as a possibility? Should there be any fair share money left?
Again, for the use of a fair share of the engineer, through your worship, if it is related to capital project engineer, there is nothing that says that we cannot. No.
Okay, because I know that other municipalities do that.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, one more.
So obviously, we're at a point to make some decision here. And is it the thought that we put forward these two areas or just one?
Councillor Javetkov had suggested we put forward both, and that's where we're just in the discussion stages, so. Councillors Wilbur and Kemp, do you have any comments on the phone discussion?
Not from me.
Okay. It's always so hard, and I appreciate you guys on the phone. It's difficult to engage, so I want to try and do my best to make sure we engage you guys. So Councillor Javetkov and then Councillor Earl.
Yeah, my thought with putting both of them in for grants, they're both significant projects. So depending on the percentage that would be covered, it would be significant. The priorities, like if they look and see that you've got two grants, two grant applications in separate, if they would say, okay, well, we'll do one and not the other, or that they would give both, I don't know. I guess that's, you don't know what their thinking is. But either one of those, if we're successful with either one, you know, it's a lot of money. It's a huge bonus to the city. So, you know, applying for two, they may just take that opportunity to say, well, we're not going to fund both of them, but we'll do one. So, you know, I don't know what the strategy would be, but to me, they're both significant. You know, they both have merits.
Sure. Councillor Earl, then Councillor Parswell.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Councillor Javetkov on this, that, you know, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and I get it, it's challenging because we're still somewhat talking about a hypothetical scenario where there's monies available, but I do agree that if we've got two shovel-ready projects ready to go, we put them both forward at such a time as you know, some funding potentially becomes available, and we'll see where it lands. But I think you know, even my preference is looking at the runway extension for the airport, given the current situation around travel is, you know, it's a great project, and I hope it'll be utilized, but I think at this point Michael's subdivision would even take priority just because it's, anyway, that's neither here nor there. I support that we, I don't even, what we're recommending based on a hypothetical scenario at this point. So if it becomes a reality, it may have to come back.
Thank you. Councillor Parswell and Kevin.
Well, Councillor Earl's sentiments pretty well parallel with mine. You know, we don't know, we're basically being proactive, which is great, and should their grants become available, but we don't know whether it's going, what strings are attached to these grants. For instance, if it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, are we willing, do we have the capacity to contribute 1/3 to, let's say, the airport, and would we be doing that? But that will all come back, but I don't know if we put in a grant application and then we don't we get it, but we don't act on it, where that puts us in the pecking order for future grants. We get kicked to the bottom of the list as being unreliable.
Go ahead, Blair.
Just through your worship, and it's been mentioned here a number of times, we are speaking about a hypothetical situation, as the federal government has not, although they've indicated that they were going to consider expediting their many billions of dollars of infrastructure available to local governments across the country. We are in a holding pattern right now. So what this does is bring you a report, talks about what could if they came out tomorrow with a shovel ready, but there may be a number of things attached to it, and there may be opportunity, particularly for us in the north. If they came out tomorrow to say submit for your shovel ready projects, these projects are not going to be developed until next year at the earliest. So I think that although we've got the motion before us on these two projects, there would be a report come back to council based on the initiation of this funding if it becomes available. They may very well, for instance, include ability for engineering to be included as a result of this. We don't do year-round construction here on our highway infrastructure, for example, or things like that, as they do in the Lower Mainland as a comparative. So,
thank you. Kevin?
Through your worship, just one point of interest is in discussion with our consultant with the airport. He indicated that there may be a separate stream related to aviation. Just what he's hearing in the circles, there's a lot of interest in that. So again, we don't know, it's all hypothetical, but there may actually be multiple programs that become available.
Okay, Councillor Jackman.
Just one last point there about the funding. You know, if we stand to gain 2/3 of the price of a major project, I mean, you know, that we have to consider borrowing as well if there's no money. I mean, that's a huge benefit to the city, to the taxpayers. So these projects are not sort of wishful thinking or, you know, projects that haven't been identified as important projects. So, you know, I mean, there's that consideration as well.
Motion? We need a motion. Councillor Jackman.
I'll make the motion that
We move the top 2 shovel-ready projects forward
Yeah.
for consideration when the process begins. Seconder? Councillor Earl? Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Eight, bylaws, 8.1. We have report number 20072 from the city planner regarding zoning amendment bylaw for 1600, 1604, 100 Second Avenue. Councillor Earl?
I'll move the recommendation that report number 20-072 from the city planner regarding zoning amendment 20-01 bylaw number 4446 2020 BORA Group 1600 and 1604 102nd Avenue be received. Further, that zoning amendment 20-01 bylaw number 446 2020 be given first and second reading. Further, that the requirement for a public hearing for zoning amendment 20-01 bylaw number 4446 be waived in accordance with section 464 of the Local Government Act, and further, that notice of the waiver of public hearing for zoning amendment 20-01 bylaw number 4446 be provided in accordance with section 467 of the Local Government Act.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Seconded. Was that Councillor Wilbur? Kemp.
Councillor Kemp.
Councillor Kemp, thank you. Discussion? Do we track costs of administrative, or is that part of our, we just did this. We just rezoned this property 6 months ago?
Your worship, I think probably somewhere in there between 6 months and a year ago it was rezoned. There was some opposition to the existing rezoning that we faced from surrounding residents in the area. Now this is putting it back virtually.
Thank you.
Now, do we track the costs? I do not have that answer. We do, as they go through a rezoning, there is charges associated with that for the individual applying for it. Would they capture all costs? It's my understanding that it is supposed to be fully cost recovery.
Thank you. Any further discussion, comments? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. And 8.2, we have report number 20078 from the corporate officer regarding your corporate officer amendment bylaw 4447. Councillor Parslow.
Report number 20071 from the corporate officer, reappointment of officers amendment bylaw be received. Further, that appointment of officers amendment bylaw number 4447 2012 be given first 3 reading.
Thank you. Second. Councillor Earl, discussion. Councillor Parslow.
I'm pleased we're doing what we're doing here. It helps the council deal with any potential future problems in a more expedient way.
Thank you. Further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Mayor's business, I just have a couple of items. We had a letter, and I got an email, and I think probably through to Blair, we got a request from a local business owner, and through the public health orders, there were a number of businesses that were ordered to be closed. The personal services, the hair salons, the spas, tattoo parlors, the dentists, the bars that did not offer a meal service. And so the request was from the business owner, said, look, I don't know how long I'm going to be closed, but I am closed and I'm paying an annual business license. Is there any thought from council to give us some relief from those business license fees? And so that's what's before us here today is a recommendation or consideration that Blair's did some analysis on it, and it's about $1,000 a month currently on those businesses that are ordered to close now. I can't conduct business if we waive those business licenses for those months that they're closed. And so I'm bringing that forward for consideration to council. Councillor Parslow?
As a matter of principle, I can support waiving, or whatever the proper term is, for the fees for the time period that they're closed. But I'm just, this matter made me think about other issues related to business licenses. One day, unless a better solution can come up, I'm hoping that council will be able to deal with the issue that's been before council for a few years, and that's to do with rooming houses. And one possible solution might be that people operating such a building might be required to have a business license. So in my thinking, if they had a business license to have a rooming house and they had no occupants for a few months, we would be therefore willing to terminate or reimburse them for those months. So it would be a fairly dynamic process. So I'm just wondering, not wishing to hold this decision up, if we shouldn't encapsulate this sometime in a policy amendment so that staff could act on this without having to come to council. Because I see a fairly dynamic potential happening.
The aspect of that is then you're relying on the business to say to you, look, or to the city to declare, I've got nobody staying in my place, so I shouldn't have to pay a business license.
Yeah.
And that would be like a store being open and saying nobody's coming in my door, so I need to
Close my business with it.
see. And this was the only reason I'm bringing this forward is because there are these businesses that have been ordered to be closed by the public health chief medical health officer, and that's the purpose of this. There are about 75 businesses who have been forced to close as a result of this. Councillor Earl?
Yeah, I concur. I mean, I kind of take Councillor Parslow's point, but to my mind, these are the exceptional circumstances. Their businesses aren't open for business. They can't get revenue. They've been compelled to close by due to the COVID-19 situation. It's not a matter of, same with hotels. I mean, we don't prorate hotels taxes based on their vacancy rate during the year. It's not a matter of business is slow. It's that for all intents and purposes, their businesses can't operate. So I see this, if we're going to consider it as, and I'm fine with it, as a matter of it's a one-off due to these circumstances, and should similar circumstances, God forbid, arise in the future, we can consider it again, but I don't see it as being a standard thing we're going to offer to businesses moving forward.
So I'm moving this motion forward for consideration that the staff would prorate the City of Dawson Creek business license fee in accordance with the time the businesses have been forced to close under the following categories of the order of the provincial health officer. And that's holders of liquor licenses and liquor license endorsements that do not offer meal services at their premises, and at all personal service establishments, including in-home establishments and mobile establishments, so that we will prorate that business license fee during the time of the closure orders. So making that by way of a motion.
Your Worship, it's Councillor Wilbur. I'd be happy to move the motion or second it, whichever is needed. And I would just add that I do believe rooming houses are their own entity, and we are going to have to look at that in the future, completely separate from everything else.
Thank you. So we moved and seconded. Discussion? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. And the second, we had a letter, and Blair and I had a letter sent to us and to council from a concerned business owner, the Northern Lights RV Park. And the park is expressing concerns that by us opening up the Mile Zero Park, for camping and RVs, that in this time of really significant downturn in tourism and the business, that they feel it's unfair or inappropriate that we operate the Mile Zero campground during the 2020 season during these times. And so I've asked that we bring that forward, and I wanted to bring it forward to council. I do agree with the point that I think for us to be competing with business in these times and when it's tough enough for them, and so I bring it forward for council's consideration. We've handed the letter out and looking for council's direction. Councilor Earl?
So just a couple questions and through you to staff. Do we, I mean, we have an operating agreement with the Mile Zero Park Society. We don't have the ability to, I mean, we can politely ask, but we can't force them to not open. We have that ability, like, is the ask even within our power to grant, given the operating agreement?
Through your worship, I would check into the legalities, but as the granting jurisdiction that provides the funds to them, I think they would probably enter into a discussion with us if that was council's wish to see. They could push back, and within that, then we'd have to get a legal opinion.
Councilor Tveco?
The city does not operate that park. We have an agreement with the Mile Zero Park Society that deals with operating the Mile Zero Park, Rotary Lake, and the RV park. And their source of revenue, their only source of revenue other than fee for service for chemicals and stuff for the Rotary Lake, their only source of revenue is the revenue from that RV park. So if you suspend the use of that park, basically you're suspending the agreement. You've stopped maintenance, or you stopped any operation on the Mile Zero Park. To me, because we're not operating that park, this letter is, it doesn't represent the real picture. Any revenue that comes out of that RV park goes back into the operation of the Mile Zero Park. So I'm not in favor at all. I can see the point. I can see the point she's trying to make, but it's just this isn't the case here. It's you know, we've got two entities. They're basically two businesses. One is non-profit, one is for-profit. So I don't agree with asking them to stop taking RVs into that park.
Thank you. Councilor Parslow?
Well, as the liaison between this council and the Mile Zero Park Society, I would, I'm sure, you would agree that people, if we're going to make such a decision, we should extend the courtesy of learning about the impact of this on the society. Its impact, I can only give you a sort of a high-level perspective on this, is that, as Councillor Javatkov said, that the revenue from the RV park is to go towards the operation of the Heritage Village, and the society does receive a grant from the city, which is for the grass cutting, Rotary Lake area, and the splash park. My understanding is all that money covers all those expenses. Should the city see, there's two parts of this. The request is that the Mile Zero Park campground be closed. It doesn't deal with the grant. The grant is earmarked for the recreational purposes of the community. So if you close the park, you will be compromising the integrity of your pioneer village from the point of view of maintenance, upgrades, etc., etc. So I think that needs to be explored. What with Dale Campbell and his very fine committee, is there are implications. If you remove the grant, then you need to deal with the issues of grass cutting and the operation of the splash pad. I would suggest to you that it will cost you a lot more money than it's costing you right now. But I do think before you make any decision, we should understand fully the impact of that. And it would be a major long-term one, but we're in that position, aren't we, right now, of having to make some very significant decisions. I do know that they're not expecting many. They have not hired the usual staff complement, but I would suggest that if you want to make a decision, that we've had an appropriate meeting with the society and that council understands the impact of this decision.
Yeah, and 2 points. I think we're assuming that if we close the campground, that we would take on that operation. And we've closed parks. We reduced our park maintenance budget last year by $400,000. So we don't do the same level of maintenance. So I think by closing it, you absolutely appreciate there's going to be impacts to them, but you also got impacts to our own local businesses, Tubby's RV Park and Northern Lights RV Park, and I think there's one other one. So that's my only reason for bringing it forward, and I wanted to deal with it because you got this whole question of city taxpayer funded operation and asset competing with the private sector in a time when it's going to be very, very difficult, especially in the tourism season. And so that's why I wanted to get it on the agenda. Councillor Jackman?
Yeah, I don't consider it as city funded, to be honest. You know, the decision was made to put that into a package so the RV park operates the Pioneer Village out there. But on another point, at least when I was there, we never did any marketing. You know, we accepted the traffic that came through and that was it. One of the things we could assist Northern Lights with is letting them know what projects are coming up, and who to contact for marketing, you know, space and that type of thing.
Sure.
You know, I think that would help. Like looking at the cancellations that she's had already, is there going to be anybody coming through town? You know, I've been looking at the Mile Zero Park there, and I think there's 2 or 3 per night. By this time, on a normal year, we would probably have been a third full. So it's pretty slim pickings out there.
So I bring it forward. I was looking, if council's not willing to make a motion, I completely understand that. Councillor Earl?
And bear with me, make a motion that staff enter into discussions with the Mile Zero Park Society around how they can operate their facility how to mitigate the impacts to local business if they're competing. It's going to be a broad-based discussion, but bring the issue to their attention, see what ideas they have, and we can go from there. I guess time is of the essence as we're slowly getting into tourism season. But I mean, I wouldn't want to make a motion to order them to close without first having that discussion, and if they have any other ideas at the time about how we can lessen the pain for our local businesses, I'd be certainly happy to hear any thoughts they have on the matter. But
Your motion to direct administration to contact Mile Zero Park Society and discuss with them the implications of
the content of the letter
their
and
operations of their trailer park,
yeah,
RV park.
sure.
Blair, any questions on that?
No, Your Worship, we can do that.
Okay. Do I have a seconder for the motion? Councillor Parslow, discussion?
Your Worship, Councillor Wilbur, in listening, I've heard a couple different takes on it's a fee for service agreement that I believe we have with the Mile Zero Park Society, not a grant. And It is on city property, and so, as you have said, we have closed other facilities, so I'd be interested to hear what that information coming back from that discussion is. But can I get some clarity from staff? We actually have, if I'm correct, a fee-for-service agreement with the Mile Zero Park Society for not giving them a grant. And if they're, my other question then, for part of that discussion with them is, if they have not hired staff to look after the park and oversee that stuff, how are they maintaining it? Would be that, I would like that information brought back too, but I want to clarify, we're not giving them a grant, that we have to have a fee-for-service agreement with the Mile Zero Park Society.
Thank you. Blair?
Through you, Your Worship, I don't have the agreement in front of me, but I believe it is a fee for service, and that service relates to what's been spoken about here this morning from different members of council. They provide a service to the Pioneer Village. They operate
It's just strictly for Rotary Lake.
Yeah, for the fee for service, which now is the splash park as a result
Yeah.
of the challenges we faced with Northern Health on Rotary Lake. So, but
Thank you. Further discussion? Councillor
Well,
Javetkov?
just another thing, I mean, can we include in this, or do we need to give her information about the projects that are coming on?
Yeah,
here?
we have those discussions, and I certainly engage with all of them when I know that stuff is happening. I reach out. So. Further discussion? Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. That's it for me, I think, under Mayor's business. Diary, nothing. Consent calendar. 3 or 4 letters. Motion to approve consent. Councillor Parslow, second. Councillor Earl. Anybody want to lift anything from consent? Letters? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Nothing strategic priorities at this point.
nothing under that, Your Worship.
Okay. Media? Blair?
Your Worship, we did have a question with regard to an application that was to come through the city of Dawson Creek from the Bear Mountain Nordic Ski Club with regard to the Agri-Spirit Fund. They had $25,000. They wanted it to go through a municipal government in order to do that. Our CFO has worked with CRA, and unfortunately, we are not able to be a conduit flow through to this organization, as it doesn't have a charitable status, as I understand it, Flavia. So we're in a position, a very worthwhile project. The work they do on that ski trail and the individuals that do it is incredible, but the city at this point is unable to be that conduit to have that Agri-Spirit Fund of $25,000 flow through the city up to the Bear Mountain Nordic Ski Club. So it's unfortunate. We can notify the individual that they could possibly try through the Peace River Regional District, but again, they may be in the same position.
We've done that a couple of times. I know at the RD where they've done exactly that for fire department. I believe the Toms Lake Fire Department maybe had applied for funding for placement. So we'll pass that on to them for their information, and they can reach out to the RD as well for their input.
All right. And again, in no way it reflects on the worthiness of this. I think it's amazing, but when the CRA tells us as a city we are unable to be the conduit to do this, we have to adhere to that.
Perfect. Okay, I have a motion to recess to closed. Oh, sorry.
Worship,
Go ahead,
sorry,
Blair.
there's a couple of things, and to fit them in, just for information of council, there was a request put to us last week for, during the pandemic issue that we face in our city and across, certainly not just the province and our country, but the world, many people who find themselves with no accommodation, homeless, and our city is not exempt from that, are having a difficult time accessing facilities, whether it be to clean their hands, for washrooms and so on. We had a request put forward to us from the people that work with the opioid issue as well. And since we have installed public toilets in front of the Kin Arena in the downtown area, there's also a hand washing station there as well. So I just wanted to bring that forward for your information. And also Alaska Avenue paving was scheduled to, they were going to begin early in the year. There has been some changes to that. It looks as though now they are working from the traffic circle out through Highway 49. They will be back. August is the planned time now to redo all of Alaska Avenue from the railway tracks by Louisiana Pacific in through Dawson Creek to up to, it would be 10th Street. We have concrete between 10th and the actual traffic circle. The traffic circle would be included in that upgrade as well.
Any impacts to the, when 8th Street, I guess 8th Street construction will only impact it down by closer to the mall traffic?
That one, there will be, I think, significant, they're working on the traffic flow program for us now, and we're looking forward to that. There was concern about the Alaska Avenue repaving, though, that it would have potential impact on having to shut down some businesses for some time. Not a very good time to have to deliver that message, so I think that Highways has worked with the proponent and will be coming back and doing nighttime paving in the August, so it would be less of an impact on our business community.
Thanks, Blair. Anything further?
That's everything from me, Your Worship.
So, motion to move to recess to close, please. Councillor Parslow, Councillor Earl, all in favor? Opposed, carried. Thank you. So we'll take 5 minutes and move it to our closed.